John Travis in Mullumbimby, New South Wales on February 25th, 2020, talking to Bethany Hays in Cumberland, Maine on the 24th of February. And I noticed that light is shining there again. If you can twist it a little bit so as it gets darker. Yeah, because it's going to get dark there. It's after 5 o'clock. We'll get to watch the sunset over your woods where the snow is. And welcome. 24 years ago we met in Mount Madonna Center in Santa Cruz. And here we are. We're still both kicking.
That's right, which is a good thing.
I want to find out more about who you are and why. And let's begin with where you were born and your family of origin and birth order and things that might have influenced your later life.
Okay, well, I was born in Washington, D.C., which back then I think didn't have quite as much bad energy as it does now. I am number 2 of 4. And my mother is still alive at 97, going strong. Wow. She may never die. And my father died young at the age of 62, which was back in 1982. And he was very influential for me because he taught me that there was nothing I could not do if I wanted it bad enough. So of course it was very traumatic for me to figure out that I would never be a concert pianist because I can't reach an octave in a note. So that was traumatic. But basically, as a woman who wanted to go into medicine, it was pretty great self-esteem training, which if you're a woman who went into medicine when I did, which, back in 1971, you needed some self-esteem to get through that. So let's see, I'm number 2 of 4. There are 2 boys and 2 girls. I'm the mother of 3 sons, the grandmother of 3 grandsons, and yes, a granddaughter.
All right.
Who's the love of my life. And I think, the universe thought I probably wouldn't make a very good parent for a girl until I was in my 70s. So anyway, I have a female offspring now I'm very excited about. She lives in Singapore, which I'm not very excited about. And so I don't get to see her very often, but there's Wi-Fi and there's FaceTime. And my son calls me every Friday and I get to play with Leah over the internet. So that's great.
Now, who's your oldest sibling, a boy or girl?
My oldest sibling was a boy. My older brother is named Frank, and Frank is a self-made millionaire, and he is the father of 3. He's a very tightly wound, highly driven character who has to control everything, including every conversation. And he currently is, he's got the worst genetics in the family, so he's currently dealing with cancer, and which he has not had a recurrence of. And he's dealing with Parkinson's, so he's got some real issues. Then I have a younger sister. She's 4 years younger than me, and she got the bad breast cancer diagnosis this year. So I learned everything there is to know about breast cancer. And then I have a younger brother, and he's still healthy because he listens to his big sister, and so he's been doing things to stay healthy, which. I think I finally talked him into not running any more marathons, but I haven't talked him out of half marathons. So I said, well, as long as you feel good before, during, and after the run, I'm okay. So
now, growing up with the older brother, what kind of influence was he on you as a kid? My partner had an older brother that very strongly had a lot of influence on her.
Well, Let's see, what kind of influence did he have? He used to chase me around, and well, early on, I was his baby sister, and so I was part of the gang. Okay, this is my
Ah,
sister Bethany. She's as good as a boy, so she's part of the gang.
oh,
And then I
good.
went off to school, and that was disastrous for our relationship.
Yeah.
So then he started sort of, running me around and beating up on me. But he did run me through a glass door, which severed my ulnar nerve, which is why I got through medical school, because there's always an ulnar nerve question on every test in medical school, and I could answer them all. I guess I can give my brother credit for that. And then when he was a teenager, he was the bad boy and I had to be the good girl. So that was, one of those stories.
Uh-huh.
And then he would, if my parents were both out of town and we were left babysitting, he would take the car and run, and I would be in charge of the two younger kids. So, you know,
Uh,
so we
now
had
were
a
you,
not good relationship until my father died, and then his whole life turned around.
oh,
So
now,
we've been good friends. Recently, we're pretty good friends,
great.
and
Now,
I like his wife. And, you know,
were you in DC proper or Maryland or Virginia? What part of the DC area?
where was I born? I was born at. Uh, I thought I was born at Doctor's Hospital, but it turns out I was born at Columbia Hospital in 1949, and my parents were living in DC because they were going to law school at GW.
Oh, okay. But then did you grow up there or where did
No,
you?
then my daddy moved back to Texas, where he grew up.
I just heard that
And
come out in your way you pronounce Texas.
that's right. Only when I'm talking to my family do I sound like a Texan. But I can talk like a Texan. You just got to go out, slop the hogs, chase the skunks out of the irrigation pipes, put a little whistle in your voice, and that's how we talk
Oh,
in Texas.
partner. Good, good. So
George
what,
W. It does not speak Texan. Okay, I'm just telling you that's not a true Texas accent. I'm just
well,
telling you.
all their Massachusetts stuff,
Well,
yeah.
Connecticut. He grew up in Connecticut.
Oh,
Yeah,
Connecticut.
yeah, he's a
So
Connecticut.
where in Texas?
Well, let's see. Daddy moved to Midland, so they were living in Midland when I was born. But I went back. My mother went back home to have her first two babies. So, because Midland, that was pretty primitive. So she went back to Washington to have her first two babies. And so let's see. Then we moved from Midland to Fort Worth, and from Fort Worth to Dallas, and from Dallas to Houston. So from the second grade on, I grew up in Houston.
Oh, okay.
And a
And,
lot of my family is now still in Houston.
and then college, where?
College, I went to Wellesley College in
Oh,
Massachusetts.
yes. Yeah, I did a rotation at Newton Wellesley Hospital when I was.
Okay, well, they say everything that's not Boston is Newton.
No, I didn't. I've never heard that.
That's my grandfather used to say that.
And then med school?
Well, then I sort of was ACDC about whether I should go to medical school, and I didn't think I could get into medical school, and I went back to Texas, and I actually worked on George H.W. Bush's campaign, and then I went to work in a hospital as a ward clerk and a blood collector, and decided if you were going to be in the healthcare business, you needed to be the person at the top. And at that point, I thought the doctor was the person at the top. It turns out the ward clerk is really much more powerful than the doctor, and I didn't find that out until much later. But then I went to medical school in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine, which is a great place to go. I mean, it was a highly active clinical. If you went to Baylor, you learned how to practice medicine. It was not an academic, practice. It was like get your hands dirty and learn about stuff. I delivered my first baby as a first-year medical student.
I was that was my first choice too for Baylor, and they had a two-part application, and the second part they sent it to my college address over the summer, and I didn't see it until the fall, and it didn't get forwarded, and so I dropped. They dropped me, so I wound up in Boston instead, which was a struggle being a token WASP out of the Midwest.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you're the second person I've interviewed from Baylor recently. I've forgotten. I think it was David Rakel, but I'm not sure who it
Oh,
was recently. And how was med school for you? You breezed through,
I
or?
was, I loved medical school. I'm an information junkie. I love knowledge. I love information. There was a lot of it to be had. There was a lot of hands-on work. They put their medical students right out there in the field, and man, you get to do stuff from early on. And I I kind of didn't notice that there was an issue about being a woman in medicine, because I was just so I'm one of the guys, and I'm going to do this, and let's go, you know. So there was things that went on, and it took me a long time. It's like, why are they treating me this way? You know. So it took me a long time to realize that there were things that went on because I was in that first big class of women. That before my class, there were, you know, like 3 to 5 women in a class.
That's what
In
we
my
had.
class, there were like 35 women in the class. So it
James.
jumped from, you know, 3% to 30% in 1 year at Baylor. And I was that year.
Do you know why? Was it a deliberate choice
Oh,
on?
it's totally deliberate.
Uh-huh.
They realized they needed to put more women in healthcare, in medicine.
Good for them, yeah, because we had 2 or 3, and I think one who was a Wellesley grad, I remember, dropped out. And it was really hard on them. We were mean and grossly.
Oh, there was some. Actually, the guys were great. My buddy, there were our class. The thing was not, are you male or female? It was, did you go to school on the East Coast? Because they sat on the right side of the room. On the West Coast, they sat on the left side of the room. The UT people sat in the back of the room, and the Aggies sat in the front of the room. And whenever any mention of any of those areas came up, the whole side of the room would cheer.
You're kidding. Wow. So you were on the right side of the room with the
I was
Wellesley.
on the right side of the room with the East Coast, you know, liberal elite.
So it must have been a shock for you, though, going from Texas to Boston. And how was that?
Well, I wanted to go to Wellesley because the campus is so beautiful. And
Uh,
I wanted to be in a beautiful place where it snowed and there was a lake and there were trees, and you know, Wellesley College is a beautiful place.
yeah, I took
And
my daughter there. She wound up at Smith, but we toured Wellesley and
yeah,
back in the 70s,
yeah,
90s.
yeah.
So you then graduated, I presume, and went an internship.
I graduated from college. You know, I didn't graduate from high school.
Oh,
I'm a high school.
what, you skipped grades and went straight to Wellesley, or?
I skipped a grade and went straight to Wellesley. You know, high school was miserable. So
Yeah, and so then from Baylor, you went to where for your training?
well, at Baylor, and then I went into the Baylor affiliated hospitals and trained in OBGYN there because it had the single largest maternity hospital in the country. At
Wow.
Jeff Davis Hospital, we delivered at one point 18,000 babies a year. So that was like 165 babies a day.
Wow.
So I delivered 150 babies as a medical student.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I delivered but one. Was it my internship? No, it must have been in at Tufts. One.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then you did what? How long is that residency?
It's 4 years counting an OB-GYN, a rotating OB-GYN internship, they called it, and then 3 years of residency. And then I did 2 years of fellowship in maternal and fetal medicine because I thought, you know, the person with the most information would be the best.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to be the best obstetrician. So I took a fellowship in maternal and fetal medicine. And then I discovered that, you know, all of my mothers were sick and all my babies were dying, and the people who had the best outcomes were actually the midwives. So then I had to sort of apprentice myself to the local home birth midwives, which they thought was entertaining. And and that's where I really learned to practice good obstetrics.
So you
I
went
can
in.
do all those high risk things, but actually I was trained by the guy who was the head of maternal and fetal medicine at Baylor used to say a good obstetrician has a fat ass and a long cigar.
And
By which he meant, if you're thinking about doing something, go back and smoke a long cigar, like do something else for an hour.
oh, I get it. I get it.
And see if Mother Nature doesn't take care of it for you, and he was
Great.
right.
Yeah, I remember that film that came out a few years ago of the contrasting the birth in the Philadelphia hospital with a birthing center with a home birth, and the poor woman in the birthing at the hospital cascading complications from
Oh,
her.
yeah.
So graphic. So you went into practice then?
Yep. Then I went into practice with the Baylor Department of OBGYN because I just was terrified of setting up a practice. That didn't last for too long. That lasted until, let's see, I graduated like 74, 70, 75, 76. So 80, I was out of the fellowship. And then from 80 to about 89, 89, 90, let's see, I think I left the department sooner than that. Yeah, no, 89, I was in the department. And then one of my colleagues said, this is getting real bad. And if I were your age, I'd leave. I thought, well, I am my age. Why aren't I leaving? So then I left the department and went out and practiced on my own. And so that was pretty great because I got to do it the way I really wanted to, except that the hospitals wouldn't let me really do it the way I wanted. And the medical establishment wouldn't let me do home birth. And there wasn't really a good birthing center option. I didn't think birthing centers were that safe anyway. I think home births are safer than birthing centers.
Yeah, and this was Houston.
Well, unless you're too far from the hospital, then that's the only reason to have a birthing center.
Yeah.
So if you're close enough to a hospital, you're safer in your own home where your adrenaline levels are lower.
Yeah. No,
So,
you're still in Houston.
Well, also, if you're in a home birth situation, what I noticed when I attended people who had home births was I would walk in the door and somebody would say, oh, thank God the doctor's here. And I would go, wait a minute, do you see a scalpel in my hand? Do you see a pair of forceps here? Is there an anesthesia machine in my car? Because without those things, I can't do a thing. I can't do anything more than your midwife. So you need to not expect anything from me. So anyway, that was, I learned a lot.
You're still in Houston then?
I'm still in Houston then. And then I turned 40 and oh dear, when women turn 40, some big happens. And I was miserable. I was really miserable. And somebody handed me a cassette tape that Chris Northrup had done. It was a talk that she did in Boston at the ICEA conference. And on the tape, it said, women today are asked to be holy in one place and then to go home and be holy in another place with no model for wholeness. And unless there's an ego strong enough to integrate the two, it leaves a hole in the center.
Wow.
And into that hole falls addictive behavior, which she then described, coming home, opening the refrigerator and grazing until bedtime. And I thought, oh man, this woman knows my life. I got to go talk to her. So then I tried to get an appointment to talk to. I said, I'll come as a patient. I'll come as a supplicant. I'll come as a doctor. I'll come. Just get me an appointment. Let me talk to her. So she finally agreed to talk to me, and we spent our first luncheon on the porch at the cannery, talking about healthcare, white male pediatricians, how if either one of us ever had another baby, we'd have a home birth, and that was the beginning of my relationship with Chris Northrup. So then I went home and I thought, something's wrong. Actually, Bernie Siegel comes into the picture here. So Bernie Siegel came and gave a talk at Baylor. And it was a big room with, stacked up, people of theater style room. And Bernie said, "How many people in this room want to live to be 100?" And I whipped around to see whose hands went up. And I mean, 3 hands out of like 100 people went up. And I looked at my hand was kind of going like this. And I'm like, "Get up there. What's wrong with you?" And I did not hear another word he said.
Wow.
I stumbled out of that room saying to myself, some part of me does not want to live to be 100. Some part of me does not want to live. And that's the part of me that's going to kill me. And if I don't figure out what that part of me is and get it out of my life, I'm going to die. And at that point, I decided that I needed to stop practicing medicine, because I sort of bumped into the fact that the thing that made me want to not get up in the morning was practicing medicine. And like, I needed to stop. I said, from this moment, anything that does not make me want to live to be 100 is out of here.
Excellent.
And I took a year off. And people would say, "Do you have cancer?" I'm like, "No, no, I'm now living." And they would say, "Have you become a lesbian?" I'm like, "What?" And they'd say, "Are you getting divorced?" And I said, "No," but of course I did get divorced that year because my husband freaked out.
Oh.
He freaked out. So I quit. I got divorced. I decided to move to Maine. My whole life turned around in an instant. I mean, it was the instant when I decided I wanted to live.
Wow, what a St. Paul on the road to Damascus experience.
Thank you, Bernie.
Does Bernie know about this? Has he?
No, I don't think Bernie's heard that story.
I will send him to hear this.
Okay.
Bernie's up. I'll tell him what minute it's at. Anyway, we missed the fact you picked up a husband somewhere back there along the line.
Yeah. Okay. So this was an important year. So I got married in, right out of medical school in 1974. And then my husband had 2 children by a former marriage. So in 1976, I am now a junior resident in a program with 40 residents. I developed thyroid cancer and got radioactive iodine 4 times, which meant for the month before that, I was profoundly hypothyroid. I adopted my 14-year-old stepchild and I had my first baby. That all happened in 1 year.
My gosh.
Oh, and I became the first female chief in the OBGYN program. Yeah.
Oh.
That was between my junior and senior year in the residency. That was a tough year. That was a tough year.
All that extra thyroid going for you, I'll bet.
Well, it was not having any thyroid. It was you had to get radioactive iodine. You go off your thyroid medication, and you wait until your TSH is over 100.
Oh.
And then they give you radioactive iodine, and the high TSH drives it into your thyroid and kills the thyroid cancer.
Oh, interesting. So now, was your husband in medicine, or how did you?
No, he's a PhD psychologist and a lawyer. He likes to say he's a real doctor and I'm just a plumber. And I used to say, and I let him think that for the sake of the marriage.
So why did he think he was a real doctor with?
He's a PhD,
Oh, that okay. I thought somehow the lawyer combination made it.
The lawyer, he was very proud of being a doctor lawyer. So he's a doctor or a PhD JD. He's got lots of education.
Are you still in contact, or? Oh,
we are so much better divorced together than we were married together. We raised our children divorced together, and they used to say, their friends wanted to know when they were going to start acting like the children of divorced parents. And they would say, well, we don't really feel like our parents are divorced. They just stopped yelling at each other. So we did a really great divorce. And then and for 10 years, we, raised the kids together, divorced. And then he had the unmitigated call to get married a 3rd time. But he married a gal who's been very sweet to my family and invites me for, Christmas Eve and takes care of my kids and does family reunions, and I get included in the Hays family reunions. So it's a working relationship there too.
So they're nearby then in Maine?
Oh no, they're in Houston.
Oh, okay. So
He's
long.
still in Houston. He's stuck in Houston. I got out of that.
So what was your name before you became Hayes?
Montgomery.
Montgomery. Okay.
But if you're going to be a doctor, you do not want to sign Bethany Rebecca Montgomery because it never fits on the page,
Exactly.
So I traded, Bethany Rebecca Montgomery to be Hayes, and that's so much easier to sign if you're signing it 20,000 times a day,
Yeah, I learned to do a scribble. So now you've left the marriage. You're taking the year off, and you're off to Maine.
Left Houston and decided, wait a minute, I don't have to stay in Houston. So I up and moved to Maine. I took 2 of my kids with me, left the oldest with his dad, and moved to Maine and joined Chris Northrup's practice at Women to Women.
Uh-huh.
And I was there until 2001 when a group of us opened an integrative practice called True North.
I remember, yes.
And True North ran for 15 years, and then it ended, sadly. And then I retired because I said, well, I'm 65. I guess I don't need to keep struggling with this. Well, I was 66, but just counting. And so then I retired. So I would say, and then I bought an RV, and I've traveled around the country in my RV because the last year when I sat in a moldy room alphabetizing charts so I could close down True North because nobody would help. Well, that's not true. A couple of people did help. All I could think about was getting in a car and driving away from it all.
Uh-huh.
And so I did get in a car and drive away from it with my dog. And then I realized that if you're going to have a dog, the places that let you stay with a dog are really nasty. And so I needed an RV. So I bought an RV and I've gone all the way around the country twice in my RV.
Wow.
And I've gone to Kansas 3 times and I went to see the eclipse in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I've been up into the lake region in Maine, and
Well, let's go back to when you were with Chris. You were doing home births, or what?
No, I came to Maine, and Chris said, you're going to want to deliver at Mercy Hospital, not Maine Medical Center. And you should go talk to Carol Ward. Well, Carol Ward was myself in another body doing the same thing I had been doing, struggling with it in Maine, the way I had struggled with it in Houston, only she had been a bit more successful because Mercy Hospital put a midwife in charge of their birthing center.
Oh.
So they had one of the first LDRP birthing centers in the country, labor recovery, labor delivery recovery, and postpartum.
Uh-huh.
All in one room. So you just went in, you birthed the baby. They didn't move you around. You were there and then you went home. And because a midwife ran it, she hired a bunch of nurses who understood normal birth. And I went in there and I said, so VBACs, do I have to put a fetal monitor? Do I have to put an internal monitor in? And they said, well, not unless you want to, you're the doctor. I went, what? I get to decide? I mean, there's no policy that says I have to do that, And so Carol and I had a great practice together. We did normal birth, and she's a great gal, and we had a big practice, and we had a lot of fun, and we're still friends, and we're both retired, and we got all of the home births that needed to come to the hospital. They came to our practice.
Uh-huh.
And we did, at Mercy Hospital, I could deliver in the tub. I could.
They had a tub.
They had a tub. I could deliver in the tub.
Uh-huh.
They built a big new birthing center where my first 2 grandchildren were born, and there's a tub in every room there.
Wow.
At Maine Medical Center, they put a tub in, but they didn't really know what to do with it, so they floated rubber duckies in it, and that was about it. So that, they really didn't know what to do with the whole normal birth thing.
Now, was Barbara Harper involved in getting the tubs there? She's one of the main distributor of hospital tubs, but
I don't know. I wasn't in charge of, what tubs they put in and how they decided.
now, what was the home birth scene then in that area? Who were
the home birth scene, there were a lot of lay midwives. There weren't any, let me think. There's a midwifery school up in Bridgeton, but it was a school for home birth, for
direct entry
midwives. And so there weren't any CNMs birthing outside of the hospital. There was a CNM practice that Carol and I worked with. They were in Carol's office initially, and then they sort of separated and had their own practice, but we were their backup. So they would call and say, would you come in and be fairy godmother? Something's going on and I'm not sure. And you go, okay. And so you'd go in and sometimes you'd go in and say, hi, I'm here. And sometimes you'd go in and meet the patient and look at the monitor strip. And sometimes you'd just go into the doctor's lounge and lie down. And then after a while, the midwife would come in and say, okay, you can go home now. And you're like, okay, bye. And the patient would never even know that they had a fairy godmother in case something bad happened. But because we were so willing to come whenever they called, and because they were so careful and knew that we weren't going to take over and beat up on their patients, they called early and often, and we never had problems.
And this was a birthing center?
This was at the LDRP birthing center in the hospital at Mercy Hospital.
At Mercy, okay.
Right.
Now, what was was this before they started threatening your insurance if you had anything to do with home births and, the draconian measures that happened around the country?
Well, they couldn't really, because the patients came into the hospital, somebody was going to take care of them.
Oh, okay. No, I'm thinking of the support. Did you have any support of the actual home birth on the home birth scene?
Well, there was. I went and taught at the Bridgeton School. I wanted the people to know that you could get into a lot of trouble in a big hurry, and you needed to be aggressive about intervening. And if you weren't sure, you needed to get help. And then that meant you needed to cultivate a relationship with an obstetrician who'd come when you called.
Yeah, well, back in Virginia in the 90s, and I had some contact. That was around the time we met, right after that. There was one doctor who they could count on, and they pulled his insurance, so they were left high and dry. And
well, they kind of had trouble doing that with me because, first of all, I was trained in maternal and fetal medicine, so I was smarter than most of them. And second of all, I was very careful, so I didn't have bad outcomes. I just didn't have bad outcomes. And so I had the lowest C-section, and when in Houston, when I was practicing at St. Luke's, which was more difficult, they kept trying to say I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that, and that wasn't safe and that wasn't safe. And I said, show me where it's not safe, because I have the lowest C-section rate in the hospital and the second lowest rate of transfer to intermediate and high risk delivery, intermediate and high risk nurseries. And I'm still doing high risk obstetrics. So just tell me where I'm going wrong here. Well, here's a good story. So, so I had listened to, some of the best people around about normal birth, and I was letting people deliver, wherever they wanted to be, and so some of them wanted to be on the floor because it felt grounded and the floor was cool and it felt good down there. So I would just slide a sterile drape in underneath them and deliver them on the floor. So the nurses didn't like that, because for some of the nurses who were older, it was hard to get down on their knees and do the fetal monitoring on the floor. So they wanted me to stop that shit. Pardon my French. So they wanted me to stop that, and And so I heard that they were going to tell me that I couldn't do that because it wasn't sterile. And I said, well, the floor is not sterile, but I'm not delivering onto the floor. I'm delivering them onto a sterile drape. So I called the head of infectious disease and I said, Lane, are the mattresses that the nurses, draw blood and stick the needle into the mattress, are those more or less clean than the floor at the hospital? Because either one of them, I'm going to put a sterile drape over to deliver. So which one is cleaner? And he said, well, probably the floor. Okay, so he says, because they mop that every day. Okay, so I went to the meeting. They said, well, we can't let you do this birth on the floor thing because it's not sterile. And I said, well, the head of infectious disease says that the floors are cleaner than the beds, than the mattresses. And that kind of stopped him. Okay, so the next thing I heard, Lane Gentry had to write a letter saying, I'm not approving of deliveries on the floor.
Oh.
Okay, so I said, okay, so the mattresses are okay to deliver on. They said, yes. I said, okay. Well, what if I took a mattress and put it on the floor? Then would it be okay to deliver it on the floor? Because, and they said, well, yeah, I guess so. I said, okay. So if I took a mattress off the stretcher out there in the hall and I put it down on the floor, I can deliver on the mattress with a sterile drape on top of it. They said, I guess so. Yes. Okay. So the next time I'm doing a delivery, I said, can you go get the mattress off? She says, well, why don't you use the birthing mat? I said, there's a birthing mat? She said, yeah, we bought a birthing mat. I said, there's a birthing mat and I don't know about it. They said, well, we can't use it yet. I went to the head nurse. I said, I understand there's a birthing mat and nobody's told me. She said, well, we don't have a protocol for using it yet. And I said, well, you should get the protocol written because I'm going to use it the next time I have a birth that wants to happen on the floor. She's like, okay, Bethany, I'll get the protocol. So then I had a birthing mat. It was that kind of stuff.
Now, this was St. Luke's and not Mercy, right?
This is St. Luke's in Houston.
Back.
Yeah,
We're back
so
there.
I'm back in Houston. So then I came up to Mercy, and man, they would let me do anything I wanted. It was just great.
Now, did you do much with birthing stools and using gravity to?
Oh yeah. Oh sure. Yeah, we did. I did my first squatting birth back in Houston. That was actually pretty entertaining. I saw the film from Brazil called "Birth in the Squatting Position," and I was like, "Oh my God, you can deliver a baby without touching it. I've never seen that before." Okay, so I thought, well, I got to try that. So the next patient I had was a prime gravida, and I said, okay, you're complete, it's time to push. I said, put your hand over here on this rail and your hand on this rail, and we're going to help you up, and I want you to just squat right here in the bed. And she said, okay, and her husband says, okay, and the nurse is like, what the heck are you doing? And I said, okay, now push, and she goes, ooh, boom, and the baby comes out. And I went, oh my goodness, and her husband went, oh, look at that, and the nurse went, oh my goodness. I said, well, that works.
Is that what Michelle Don calls the fetal ejection syndrome?
Something like it was like if the bed hadn't been there, she would have ejected that little guy. So yeah, it was exciting. So then I started doing squatting births, and then we got a birthing chair, and then we got one of those fancy electric birthing chairs that does everything but deliver the baby for you. So I did a lot of those, and then at St. Luke's, they didn't have a birthing chair, but they had a birthing stool because they had midwives. So the birthing stool, and then, squatting, and then, it didn't, wherever the mother was comfortable, if she was encouraged to listen to her body, she would tell you the right position. And sometimes she'd get in weird positions and you think, why is she doing that? And then you do an exam and you go, oh, she's rotating that baby's head. I get it.
Interesting. Well, so now we met in 96?
96, that's right.
I was just moving to Virginia, and it was the Mother Friendly Childbirth Initiative that we were creating, and we formed the Coalition for I'm going to say this for the record, the KIMS, we pronounced it.
Right, the KIMS group.
For improving maternity services.
Yeah.
And that the term normal birth didn't come out till after that, as I recall. Didn't start hearing it till later.
No, no, I was, 96. No, I was already doing.
Were you calling it that? Maybe you.
I wasn't calling. I knew about the baby friendly initiative because I was the head of the Baylor Lactation Clinic. And so we were, we were moving things in our hospital to try to get more mother friendly practices, which is how I ended up going to that meeting, I think.
Yeah.
Can't remember exactly who invited me, but anyway.
So now the switch to True North, and I know my friend Kent Peterson sent me a paper that you'd written that was integrative medicine, and when did that? Obviously, home births and natural or normal birth is an extremely important part of integrative medicine that they don't seem to get.
No.
So you must have had your foot in two camps there.
Well, the midwives really taught me about integrative healthcare, and then Chris Northrup said, well, you should go to the American Holistic Medical Association meeting. And suddenly I was thrown into a group of people where, I was such an innocent. I was so behind. I thought a shocker was something you put on your car to keep it from bouncing around. And, homeopathy was some kind of alternative sexual preference. And I thought, I didn't know any of that stuff. So Chris took me to the American Holistic Medical Association, where I began to learn about, everything there was out there. And I had already decided in Texas, when I made that transition in my 40s, I thought, there's a whole lot out there that I have never given credence to. And I need to reevaluate those things as they come in. I need to just take it in as though it were real and put it up on a shelf that I labeled things I don't understand yet. And I would just listen to, presentations at the American Holistic Medical Association. They would go up on the shelf of things I don't understand yet. And about 6 months later, things started falling off the shelf. And that's where that fits. That's what that means. Oh, I get it now. That belongs right here. So so that's how I got into.
What year did you go to that meeting?
It was the year Chris Northrup Chris was a co-president with Bernie Siegel.
That was 89, I think she said. Yeah. Where was the meeting? Remember where?
It was in Seattle.
Okay, I was at that meeting too. That's where I met Chris.
At the Hilton Hotel by the airport.
Yeah. And
that was a transformative moment for me, going to that meeting.
Adams was there, and I think the astronaut Edgar Mitchell was there too.
Yeah, Edgar Mitchell was there. Patch Adams was there. I can't think of any nouns and names anymore. The guy from Arizona.
The McGarry's?
No. Well, Gladys was there because Gladys was a founding member. But come on, Bethany. The famous herbal, the guy who started the integrative.
Seeley? Not Norm.
No, not Norm. Norm was there. Norm was there because he was one of the founding members. Kind of trying to think of the guy's name. It'll come to me when I don't try to think of it. But it was the guy in the herbalist who started the integrative medicine fellowship in Arizona.
Oh, Andy Weil.
Andy Weil was there. And so I came home and I knew all those people then. So that put me way ahead of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so then I was an AHMA member, and then I was an AHMA board member, and then I was practicing at Women to Women, and I kept seeing people who had gastrointestinal problems. I didn't know what to do with them. I would send them to the gastroenterologist, and they would scope them up both ends and say everything's fine. And I would say, he said everything's fine, but you're having diarrhea every day. That's not fun. So then Marcel Pick, who was at Women to Women, started doing functional medicine. And I thought, well, I got to go find out about that functional medicine thing.
Yeah.
So I went out to Seattle and did the functional medicine, applied functional medicine in clinical practice, like the second time they ever did it.
Was that with Jeff?
And I was totally blown away. I was captured because it was science. You know, this wasn't woo. This was like real science.
Yeah.
And it was like I fell in love with biochemistry again.
Was that with just Jeff Bland doing that, or?
Yeah, Jeff did the whole thing. Jeff did the whole thing. And sometimes, if the bulb on the projector blew out, he did the whole thing without slides.
Oh.
He was amazing. And and I said, these people know what they're talking about. So I got involved with IFM, and then I got on the board of IFM. And what I loved about IFM was that they had a scheme, which was the matrix, and they had a place for everything I thought needed to be in healthcare, everything.
Yeah.
And they didn't have all the places filled in yet, but they had them. They had them on the scheme. And I thought, these people are going to make it. They're going to go big because they're using the science. They're being careful. They're smart people. Oh my God, the people who taught at IFM were so smart. I thought, ooh, I want to be one of them when I grow up, So I'm at the second half of the AFMCP meeting, and David Jones, and somebody said, when are we going to get the women's health part of this? Because most of our patients are women. And so then Jeff said, well, at the break, we'll have a little chat about that. So at the break, he sat down and everybody gathered around him. So he said, well, does anybody know about the PEPI trial? And I said, I know about the PEPI trial. And he said, well, tell us about the PEPI trial. And I said, well, here's what the trial was. It's the only trial that's used bioidentical progesterone. And here's what happened. And I looked over, and David Jones was kind of leaned up against the wall grinning. And I thought, okay. And sort of toward the end of the week, he comes and slides into the seat next to me, and he says, we'd like you to teach the women's health part of this AFMCP. Could you do that? And I'm like, oh yes, I would love to do that. And I went home and I went, oh no, what have I done? It's like, I can't teach at this level. So of course, then I did probably one of my first deep dives into, research, and came up with what in retrospect was a really horrible talk, but they loved it and they invited me back. And so I taught at IFM until about 2 years ago. Every AFMCP, I don't think I missed an AFMCP until they decided they needed to grow the faculty and some things like that. So anyway, that gave me an out for getting out of the AHMA, which was doing some kind of not great things with their board. And so I left the board of the AHMA and went to IFM, and got on the board of IFM pretty quickly.
Now, back in Maine, have you transitioned out of Women to Women to True North, or where's that sit?
I was in Women to Women. I joined IFM about when was it? 2000, about 2000. And then I was at, no, that's not right. It was sooner than that, I think. Anyway, then I left Women to Women to start True North in 2001.
Okay. And how did that,
how did that come about? Well, let's see. I know how it came about. There was a group of nurses at Mercy Hospital, and they had gone to a holistic nursing conference. And they came back all fired up to get holistic nursing going at Mercy Hospital. And so they gathered together a group, which they called the Holistic Council. And they kept saying, Bethany, you should come to the Holistic Council. I'm like, yeah. They said, no, you should come to the Holistic Council. I thought, well, okay, all right, I'll come to the Holistic Council. So I went to the Holistic Council, and I was kind of hooked. You know, they called a meeting and like 40 people showed up. And there was everybody from the janitor to up, eventually the CEO of the hospital came to one of the holistic council meetings, and that was a scream because he sat down in the meeting. He said, it was really interesting. This holistic council has been meeting in my basement for, you know, a year and a half. And he says, you know, there were people who were nursing babies and barefoot and anyway, so we invited all of the best holistic practitioners from the community to come to the basement of Mercy Hospital and join us to figure out how to create holistic healthcare in Maine.
Ah.
And they came because they couldn't believe it was happening in a hospital. And so then the CEO got a little juice out of it because when he went down to Mercy East, you know, to Catholic Healthcare East, and they said, does anybody know about this integrative medicine thing? And he says, well, yeah, I got a group doing that at my hospital. So they gave us a little bit of money, not much, and we put together a plan and got right up to the point of opening a holistic center at the hospital with 5 holistic practices, and you know, massage and acupuncture. We picked the ones that we figured were the easiest to credential and the most used. And we interviewed everybody in the hospital, what were they using, and that was what they were using. So we got right up to opening, and they said, oh, actually, we can't afford to open this because we've got to get a new MRI. So we were just devastated, and we turned around and said, okay, but we've always said, if Mercy didn't do this, we were going to go out and do it on our own. So at that point, I went to Texas and raised some money and came back from my family. And came back with enough money to start the outpatient. I said, well, if we're going to do this, I'm not going to give my money to Mercy Hospital. We're going to do it outpatient. And so we started True North. At that point, we started True North.
And now were you the only doc?
No, there was, let's see. There was a DO who did acupuncture early on. There was a guy who had gotten pancreatic cancer and had Meatech Workers had done hands-on healing on him. And so he had gotten interested in alternative healthcare. He was an emergency room doctor in Washington, D.C. And he moved to Maine to get out of the city and the crazy and get calm and relaxed and hope he could have some time with his kids. And Joe was a triple boarded internist, emergency medicine, internal medicine, emergency medicine, and something else. Triple boarded physician, and kind of a sweet guy who's still alive, by the way. And Joe went into the hospital and said, you know, we need to, you know, do something with integrative care. And they said, oh, go talk to Bethany Hays. They're doing that already. So Joe showed up on my doorstep and said, I want to be a part of it. And I said, sure, great, doctor, we need that. So there were 3 of us for a while. And then when we opened the center, I started recruiting people, and ultimately, I have no idea how many doctors we ultimately had come through. They would come and go. When we ended, there were 3 of us left, and 2 of them were family doctors, and they came and said, we're going to retire. And I said, well, I can't do this by myself, so we're closing it. And so that was when it ended.
So it ran its course from just aging out the staff? Or?
No, well, the way I tell that story is we were doing great. We were, as of the January in 2014, I think, in January of 2014, we were going to become financially viable. We were going to be self-sufficient without the money that my family had been giving us to support us. Mm-hmm. And it was in large part because we had 6 doctors, and we had invested a lot of money in a young osteopathic physician who was doing, huge practice in Lyme patients. And she all of a sudden decided she was just going to break her contract and go to California.
Mm.
So so she went to California and took her money with her, and that was devastating. And then the second one said, well, I'm going to New Zealand, and I'm breaking my contract too, because you let her break her contract, which we hadn't actually done. And so we had 4 people who left the practice in 6 months, and 3 of them broke their contracts.
Wow.
Wherein I learned that a contract doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
There's always a lawyer that can get you out of whatever contract you have signed. That's what I learned.
Mm.
So we had lawyers who created the contracts. We modified the contract when we had trouble with it. We had an ironclad contract, and they just threw it up in the air and walked away.
Wow.
And at that point, we pulled in to try to keep things going, and we did keep it going for another 2 years. And that was when the last 2 doctors said they were going to retire. That's when I said enough.
Now, how much back in your heyday, how were you accepted by the mainstream allopaths, and did you get much flack or?
Actually, we had some people at the medical center who appreciated that we took care of all the really crazy patients so that they didn't have to. In fact, I went to the head of the OBGYN and I said, Hector, you need to support True North, because we're providing a service for the community that's important, and that is we take care of all the really crazy people. And he said, you know what, you're right about that. And I said, so if True North goes down, all those people are back in your practices. So you need to let us keep doing what we're doing. I said, we credential all our practitioners. We're following all the rules. We've got the insurance. We're doing everything that the conventional world wants us to do. We always looked at it from a conventional point of view and also an alternative point of view. So, the first people we credentialed were the shaman. That was fun.
Say more about that.
Well, the shaman went to lunch. I knew them from Women to Women, and I went to lunch with them. I said, you should come down to the holistic council meeting. They went, well, they're not going to let us in to any, but okay, they would come. So they never expected to get let in, And so we just kept moving forward. And I said, well, we got to figure out how to credential you. So one of them was an LCSW. And I said, well, I'm going to call this an alternative kind of psychotherapy. And as long as there's the LCSW in the room and she's licensed, then all we need to do is credential her as an LCSW. But then we've got to look at it from the alternative point of view. So how do shaman credential shaman? And they said, well, you'll have to talk to our spirit guides. And we said, okay, how do we do that? They said, well, if you come to our weekend workshop, we'll teach you how to journey, and you can journey on it. Oh. So the credentialing circle, which there were, I think, 5 of us at that point, all traipsed down to someplace in southern Maine to do a workshop on shamanic journeying. So we journeyed on their credentials, and we asked, should we let these people practice in our center? And then we compared notes on our journeys, and they were surprisingly similar. Uh-huh. And we said, okay. So then we added to that. I said, I heard Brent Secunda talk about going up on the Huichol Plateau and becoming a shaman, and they wouldn't let him even be recorded. They wouldn't even let him leave the plateau and give lectures until he'd been there for 10 years. He said it was 10 years before they let him do the picking up the live snake thing. And so I said, well, we're going to put, one of the things we ask every new alternative practitioner that we credentialed was, what do you want us to ask the next person that comes and says, well, I'm an energy healer, or I'm a shaman, or I'm a, acupuncturist? What do you want us to ask them? What kind of credential, what kind of experience, training do you want them to have? And the shaman said, well, they should be practicing shaman for a minimum of 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that kept us out of trouble with a bunch of people that came and wanted to practice at True North because they were, hanger-oners. They wanted we had a pretty good reputation in the conventional medical community. We were getting referrals from the conventional medical community. And we were very careful, very thoughtful. And we actually did, probably the most interesting thing we did was we used Christina Baldwin's circle process as our self-governance. Christina Baldwin wrote a book called Calling the Circle. And then she wrote a second book called A Circle as a Leader in Every Chair. And there's a whole chapter on True North in that book.
Really?
And it turned out we were early adopters of circle process. I didn't know that at the time. I thought they were up and running and everybody did it. But we were early adopters of circle process. And so we had groupthink. We had, there was always somebody who could come up with the right answer. And we listened to each other. I learned to listen. Mm-hmm. And I learned that even though my brain runs pretty fast and I could come up with great ideas, if I was the one that always put the idea out, sometimes it'd get turned away. If I waited for it to go around the circle and someone else to think of it, then there was sort of a group thing that would happen. It was much better. So I learned to sit quietly and watch the process and wait to put my 2 cents worth in until, they stumbled on something. And so that was good for me. And people noticed. My mother noticed that I had changed.
Oh.
Yeah, it was interesting. And so then we had a plan for people who couldn't pay, and it was time dollars. And so then we got a call from we had a local TV station that came out and did a spot on us. And then the Colbert people picked up on that, and we got a thumbs up on the Colbert report.
Really?
And then that led to 2 more national. NPR did a report on us, and then somebody else did a report, and then the government called. So the government says, we hear you're doing, so we have a website for innovations in healthcare, and we understand you have an innovation. I said, we have lots of innovations. And she said, well, like what? And I listed the things that we were doing differently. She said, you really do have innovations. Well, I want to interview you and write up a page on our website. So they did, and they did a great job. They really did a great job and wrote it up. And then a couple of months later, they called and said, we want you to come down to Washington and get videoed because we're putting up a video on your page. I'm like, okay. So I figured that was going to be good for us in case they ever said that our 501c3 was not legitimate. I would say, well, we're a 501c3 research organization. The research is into whether a small group of dedicated people can change healthcare in America. So you can't really put us on your innovations website and say we're doing things that are innovative and then turn around and say we're not doing what we say we're doing, which is to research how you do this in an innovative way. So we never got into trouble with the 501c3. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
And did you go and have the video done then?
I did. I went and got videoed in Washington, D.C.
That page still exists? We can link that.
I don't know. I haven't tried to get on that page for a long time. They've taken all those innovations down. I imagine that the innovations in healthcare page is gone. I don't know. I haven't looked.
What government organization was this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
I had no idea. So what do you think is the what's replaced it, if anything, in Maine, and how was it a flash in the pan, and where the big pharma is going to continue its domination, or
well, of course, I was very discouraged. I was discouraged because I thought more practitioners were people like me who wanted control of their lives and their practice enough to put their energy or their money where their mouth was. And it turned out there weren't. That was disappointing. And then I thought I thought the group that credentialed people could sort out who the dangerous people were, who the dishonest people were. That turned out not to be the case as well. Then I think things changed. I really think that we lost True North because in the 15 years True North was there, things changed. And one of the things that changed was the me movement. You know, it's all about me, and I'm just here to make money, and you should pay me more, and I want to be paid more but do less work.
This
and
is the nurses, what everyone.
Everybody. It was the practitioners. We had trouble keeping staff. When we left, we had one staff member who promised that she would stay to the end of December when we were going to close the doors. And in November, she just disappeared. And we found her working down the street at another integrative practice. And she had drawn blood on about 40 people and not processed it and sent it off. And we found it in a baggie with no names on it in a drawer. And we had to call all those people and tell them their blood test was not done and they were going to have to get it done again. And by the way, we didn't have anybody to do it. So that was, you know, right when our executive director was working really hard to shut things down, she had to stop and track down all these people. So that was catastrophic. Then we had a person who took money out of the cash drawer because, well, she needed it. You know, she needed lunch money. She just needed it. It was there. And so that kind of dishonesty, just, I don't understand it. You know, I don't get how people can do that. And so it drove me crazy.
But there was another integrative practice in town then?
There are several, you know, there's Women to Women, and there's Integrate, which is a young man who's opened, I think, a couple of practices. And then he's had some of the same problems we have. And I don't really know what's out there anymore. I don't go to the doctor.
Well, when I interviewed David Rakel, you know, who's written all the text, or the textbook, and now he's chief of family practice at University of New Mexico. He said there are 60 programs in medical schools now. And I got encouraged that there is actually some forward movement, because it looked like things were a flash in the pan. And
well, what happened in two things happened in medical schools. One was what was it called? The group of philanthropists that the Bravewell people put a lot of money into getting integrative practices up and running in medical schools. And the medical schools were like, yeah, we'll do it as long as you give us money, you know. So they were not at all interested in integrative medicine, but they were really interested in getting that money. And so they got a lot of places started, which have, you know, some of them are, I think, still going. They considered letting True North into that club, but then they decided that we weren't going to make it. We ended up making it longer than most of those other university-based places. And then the other thing that happened, which got the medical schools interested, was IFM. And what happened in IFM, I'm kind of proud of, that was one of my thoughts on the board. When I was on the board, I said, when we go to a town to do applied functional medicine clinical practice, we should call the medical school and ask them who's interested in integrative medicine at your medical school. And then we should invite them and 2 students, for them to bring 2 of their students and give them free tuition to AFMCP. And we had a guy on our board that had a lot of money. He said, I'll fund that. And so we began, every time we went to a new town, we would call the medical school. And so we began to train people in medical schools all across the country in functional medicine.
now, who's we going to these towns? This
We, the Institute for Functional Medicine.
you just pick a they'd invite you, or how'd you happen to?
No, we were doing meetings. You know, we were doing the applied functional medicine and clinical practice. It was a week-long course, and we
Oh,
would do it in Boston, and then we would do it in San
I,
Diego, and we'd do it in Seattle, and then we'd do it in Houston. You know, actually, I don't think we ever did one in Houston, in Dallas.
oh,
Um, and so we were going all over the country. You know, we'd go to the East Coast, and then we'd go to the West Coast, and then we'd go to the center, and we'd go back to the East Coast. And they're still doing it.
good.
And they've trained a whole lot of people in functional medicine, and they've got their foot in the door in the medical schools because the medical schools realized they needed to be teaching nutrition. And nobody knew anything about nutrition because the medical schools were university based, and nutritionists were agricultural and mechanical school based, and the two never talk. And so the doctors knew nothing about nutrition. The nutritionists knew very little about medicine. And so the medical schools realized they needed to be teaching nutrition in their medical schools. And IFM had the course. So IFM started teaching nutrition in medical schools. And so that was another way they got in the door.
Interesting. And I hear so much more about integrative than I do functional, and I'd heard of functional long before that, but it doesn't seem to have had the same.
Well, part of that was Andy Weil. Andy Weil got a foothold, and he didn't want to let anybody else in the door, and he dissed functional medicine.
Oh,
Then the Quack Watch people got on to Jeffrey Bland,
saw
because
that.
Jeff
Yeah.
Bland made what I would call a classic mistake, but common, which is he began creating functional medicine foods. He began creating, you know, how do we, you know, can we turn this into a moneymaker? And so he started HealthCom, which was basically the beginning of the metagenics, you know,
Yeah.
medical food business. And so in healthcare, in medicine, you don't want to make a lot of money doing something new, because if you do, they come, it's like whack-a-mole. They got to come and get rid of you.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways they get rid of you is they sick Quack Watch, which is a bunch of quacks actually, who come and whack you down. And so if you put Jeff Bland into Google, the Quack Watch comes up.
Yeah.
So it was very hard. So Jeff had to turn IFM into a nonprofit and turn it over to the nonprofit. And it took a long time for him to leave the board, but he finally left the board. Now he's back on the board, but who's counting? So it took a while for IFM to, you know, to do the hard work that other groups were not doing. You know, AHMA wasn't doing, and it's gone. And Andy Weil was doing, but he was so determined to make it his way or the highway, you know, that when I was about to be president of AHMA, I said, what we need is a membership organization that puts all these people together. We need to all be on the same page. If we're going to change healthcare, you know, Andy Weil's people, AHMA people, IFM people, the holistic nurses, you know, that we need to all be on the same page. But
and then AHA, American Holistic Medical, turned into, I can never remember, it's AIHM, which Norm doesn't think too much of, but that's the new organization. Has that done that?
Well, AIHM, they started, they were going to board certify holistic medicine. And so the AIHM is the board. ABHIM was the board. And then the board was silly because we didn't have a residency or a fellowship. And you can't board certify somebody legitimately. You can't get on the, you know, educational platform that certifies board membership, you know, by coming to a weekend workshop. So a whole bunch of people, though, started taking the holistic health, the ABI, the American Board of Holistic and Integrative, or maybe it's Integrative and Holistic Medicine, ABIHM or ABHIM, anyway. A whole bunch of people started taking the board and putting letters after their name, which really annoys me because I have a board certification in OBGYN. So I can legitimately put ACOG after my name. And I spent,
a lot of years.
4 years getting that, And Andy Weil was furious about that because he was trying to get board certification and he had a fellowship. He had a 2-year fellowship. And then they were trying to get the fellowship going and people couldn't just stop what they were doing and go to Arizona for 2 years, not very many of them. And so then they put it online, you could do it online. And that kind of may have been before its time. Anyway, so that the organization, I think the organization that swallowed up AHMA, and I don't think it was ABHIM or
AIHM.
Is that who?
They're doing a meeting in September that I've submitted a proposal to take vignettes from this project of interviewing people like you and showing a 30, 60-second clip of, you and Norm and Chris and all the old folks that started it all.
Okay, well, edit out the part where I said bad things about, about don't get me in trouble. I have some history with that organization.
Yeah, no, it's, and Norm wasn't too happy with it either.
They were key for me. I don't want to diss them. They came along at a very important time in my career. And they put me in touch with a whole different way of thinking about medicine. And that put me on that was the second big left turn. The first left turn was I went and hung out with midwives. The second left turn was Chris Northrup put me onto the AHMA. And the third left turn was I went to the Institute for Functional Medicine. Mm-hmm. Those have been the big turning points in my career.
So you're almost back the same direction then after all those left turns.
I probably am back in the same direction. Maybe that's what I'm doing.
Or a spiral.
Yeah, I think of spirals, they're nice because you come back around to the same place and you go like, what am I doing at the same place? And then you realize, no, you're a level higher.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the future of all this is very questionable. And what I'm hoping to do is at least document the roots of it, and who knows what will happen.
Chris Northrup says, it's the pseudopodic ego of the white male system. They don't like it. And then they decide it's getting out of control. And then they decide that other people are paying attention to it. And then they just reach out and pull it into themselves.
Like a pseudopod, yeah.
Like a pseudopod.
Yeah, it's happened so often. There was another important area that you just reminded me of. Now I'm having memory blank.
Yeah.
Total blank there. We'll have to edit that one out.
You have to not think about it, then your brain will rewire to someplace else.
Well, this whole encounter with new ideas and big pharma still running the show, whether it's back and forth. Politically, we have for viewers that may be watching this far in the future, this is the era of Donald Trump, and the era of numerous Democrats trying to take him out next November. And
well, what's going to take him out? Coronavirus.
Oh, say more about that. How would that?
Well, like I said, you don't want to let a woman with my kind of brain retire because I can spend all day long researching things. And So I know everything there is to know about coronavirus, actually, partly because I have a son in Singapore and I was very worried about him. But Singapore is probably much safer than the United States in terms of what's going to happen with this virus. Unless the virus morphs, which we're not sure it's going to do. If the virus morphs into something less infectious, then it'll burn itself out and everything will be okay. But right now, the stock market dropped 1,000 points today.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They finally figured out that we're in deep trouble around the world. Okay. So, so what do you want to know about coronavirus? It's going to, there's a guy at Harvard, you should read his work. His name is Lipsky or not Lipich or something. It starts with LIP. Anyway, Mark Lip something or other is a guy at Harvard, and he has looked at what are the chances that they're going to be able to contain the virus. And The Atlantic interviewed him, and that's a really terrifying article. He says we're not going to be able to contain this virus. The only place that's actually containing it is Singapore, because they got on it early, they're doing it meticulously, and they are stopping clusters before they spread.
Wow.
So the numbers in Singapore are flattening out, and they're believable numbers because they report every single case. They report the number of test kits they've run. They report the number of positives. They report every day. You can go on their website and find out how many new patients, how many recovered patients, how many people are in the ICU. Of the new patients, you can find out when they got their first symptoms, when they were isolated, and when they got diagnosed, and where they were before they went into the hospital, and where they live and where they work, and are they connected with any of the other cases. It's amazing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Amazing. My granddaughter, who's in nursery school, they came home with a whole letter of what they were doing in the nursery school to keep the kids from getting infected and sharing the virus. And then my daughter-in-law sent me the cutest picture of these little Asian girls learning to wash their hands. You know, they're all little Asian kids, and they're having hand washing lessons. You know. And so this guy at Harvard says, if you compare what they're doing in Singapore, which is the best way you could do it, they're probably picking up, I think he said 70% of the cases. And compared to Singapore, most countries are going to pick up between 30 and 40% of what Singapore is picking up. Mm. So what that means is, you know, if 33,000 people a day traveled from China to the United States, and that went on from early December through February the 4th, when the epidemic was blowing up in Wuhan and then all over China, there are a whole lot more than the 14 cases that the CDC has reported. Mm. And he suggests that it's probably more like 100 to 200, and I would say that's probably right.
In the States?
In the United States already, not being watched, because the CDC is not looking for them.
Yeah.
So what's the CDC plan? If you go on the website, here's the plan. They have got 5 laboratories in 5 different cities that are testing for influenza virus. So what they've talked them into doing is, if the test comes back negative for influenza, they're going to test it for coronavirus in 5 cities. That way, they will know when the virus becomes spread in the community. And then they're going to start doing something about it.
Wow.
So the guy from Harvard says probably before this thing is over, between 40 and 70% of everybody on the planet will have gotten the virus. Now, I don't think it's that high. Looking at places like, well, the places to look are, you can look at the Diamond Princess cruise ship, And that'll tell you how many people are immune, how many people's immune system can handle this virus. And right now, the numbers are like 500 people out of 2,700 or 2,700, no, 3,700 people on the boat. 500 of them have tested positive. The group that came from the United States, the United States evacuated last week.
Mm-hmm.
When they got on the bus, they were all asymptomatic and had tested negative. While they were on the bus, 14 of them's test came back positive. They put them on the plane anyway. They put them in a hospital in Nebraska, which is set up for quarantine because they set it up during the Ebola outbreak. And they put them in Texas on a military base. Okay. Between yesterday and today, the number of people in that group has gone from 18 to 36.
Mm.
So that group is in the vertical stage of the outbreak, which is also true of the South Korean group. It's also true of Italy. It's also true of Japan outside of the cruise ship because they let a bunch of people off the cruise ship. So the way you know you're about to see that vertical takeoff is you'll see a death. Mm. If there's a death, it means the virus has been in the community for at least a month. It takes about a month to go from first case to the first death.
Mm.
So,
wow.
What are we doing about that? Well, I have a little group of people who are listening to my, well, they're not listening to anything. I send them a update every day in my email. So I have a little update group. So
Please add that list.
Because I'm possessed, and a geek, and I read everything. I'm tracking the numbers. I've got graphs. I can tell you that the Chinese numbers have begun to curve out, but nobody trusts the numbers because they keep changing their criteria. But the Chinese death rate is still going up, which it should for a while longer than when the numbers begin to peak, the death rate should then follow it down.
There'll be a lag, yeah.
And but in Singapore, where they've got 90 cases, it's the only place where everybody is probably being reported that can be reported. They've got 90 cases. They've had no deaths. They had 6 people in the ICU, and then 5, and then 4, and then they've got a 5th one back in the ICU, another patient in the ICU now. I'm watching, can they get those 5 people well without having them die? And I'm a little worried about the 4 that have been there for a while. And
what's
then
the treatment? Fluids?
What?
What's the treatment?
Well, they're trying antivirals, but they don't really know if any of the antivirals will work. They're hoping for a vaccine, but they won't have a vaccine for 18 months. And if they have it, they won't be able to get any pharmaceutical company to make it unless there's still a worldwide need for it. And they won't be able to get it to the people who need it because all of the countries are shutting their borders and stopping transportation.
Mm.
It's, so what do? It's just supportive care. They isolate them so they don't get anybody else sick. They give them IV fluids because they sometimes can't eat because there's a gastrointestinal side of this virus. And they give them oxygen. Apparently pretty high levels of oxygen sometimes help them. Hmm. And then they get a cytokine storm and ARDS, and that's what kills you.
What's
so
ARDS?
the other,
I don't know.
ARDS, adult respiratory distress syndrome.
Oh, okay.
It's like what premature babies get, only different. Yeah. So the thing that I'm worried about is there are a growing number of people on the internet saying, well, you should take this supplement and this, colloidal silver and this immune stimulant and that immune stimulant. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, when should you take? And should you be taking an immune stimulant at the beginning of the virus when you don't want your immune system overreacting? You want it to react normally. So how do you get a healthy immune system that kills the virus early on and doesn't send you into a cytokine storm? And what does taking mushroom extract do to that? We don't know. So, I would say vitamin D, we should all be on that because it does help the immune system, prevent viruses. And then if you get sick, slamming in some vitamin C is probably good because animals that make their own vitamin C, that's what they would do, is make more vitamin C at that point. And then what happens if you suddenly start turning south? That's when you should go to a hospital because you're going to need respiratory support. And then they may come up with some immune modulating approaches that keep you out of cytokine storm. And then, a ventilator until the debris in your lungs gets cleared out and you can breathe again. That's what it's going to look like. The good news is not everybody gets there. So actually, only about 1% of people who get the virus are going to get really sick.
And it's
so they think,
people?
What?
It's worse for older people?
It's people whose immune systems were already screwed up. So it's older people, diabetic people, people on a lot of other drugs, all the people on immune system drugs, like all the cancer patients. And then, oh, by the way, what do vaccines do? They stimulate your immune system. So are they going to help or are they going to hurt? There is one study out that showed that people who were vaccinated to influenza either had a higher rate of getting or a higher rate of dying from H1N1. And I have to look that study up again, but we don't know what the effect of telling everybody to get vaccinated is going to be.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the CDC always says, well, the vaccine doesn't really work very well for the viruses, the influenza viruses that are out this year, but you should take it anyway.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Because, hey, we bought it, so, we got to do something with it.
Yeah. Now, what about the rumor that some fairly high-level person thought it had escaped from a bioweapons lab?
Okay, so when you hear conspiracy theories, you should really go out and research them because they may be conspiracy theories. And so one of the conspiracy theories out there, which may be true, is that the Russians are sending out disinformation to get the US and the Chinese pitted against each other. So they're telling the Chinese that the US created a bioweapon and that's what's killing them. And they're telling the US that the virology lab in Wuhan is what started this whole virus, that it got loose from there. And then they've added to that they were using animals in their, in their virology research, and somebody, instead of destroying the animals, took them over to the seafood market and tried to sell them. That's how it got into the seafood market. But what the science says is there are now 2 papers which show that the virus has mutated enough to know that it had already gone human to human, person to person spread before it got to the seafood market. So the virus came from somewhere, we don't know where. It has 93% homology with some bat viruses that they have been studying since SARS. They went down to the bat caves in China and looked at the bats and found a whole bunch of coronaviruses. And so the coronavirus, Wuhan, the COVID-19 virus, we should call it by its official name,
right,
is 93% the same as some of those bat coronaviruses. So we don't know where it started. It's but once it got to the seafood market, then it exploded. And that's what's happening in the other places. Like in South Korea, there was like 3 cases, and then suddenly there's 100 cases, and then 400 cases, and then 800 cases. When this thing gets loose in a population, particularly a dense population center, and maybe in places where certain practices happen, like the thing in South Korea is in a Christian church, which is called a cult, which has like 100,000 worshipers, and they pack themselves into a room, and they're required to get down on their hands and knees, in prayer. And so, they're blaming it on case number 17, or something like that. The South Korea is actually one of the countries that's doing a better job than others. If you look, there's a report that came out last October that graded every country in the world in its ability to handle a pandemic. It's an interesting report.
Oh.
South Korea is not that far down the list.
Where's the U.S.?
Well, the U.S. is at the top of the list, and I don't believe that anymore. I think that's old. I think they used old information.
Yeah, because we certainly aren't.
They followed out the CDC and the NIH and there was a guy that there's a really interesting article I read about the when the Ebola virus broke loose in Africa in 2014. Obama created an Ebola czar, and he set up a group to respond to bioweapons and pandemics. And last year, Trump dismantled that group because Bolton thought it was not important. Just in time for the pandemic.
This all started when you're saying you think that this will undo Trump. You think people are going to make any connection?
Well, what's going to undo Trump is the economy crashing, his plans with China crashing, some people playing on the TV over and over again his news conference where he said, this is not going to be a problem because in April, when it gets warm, it's going to go away. I talked to Xi Jinping and it's all going to be fine. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Which made it look like, we were just sitting on our hands, which in fact we were. And, it's his government, his CDC, his NIH that's, not doing anything.
Yeah.
So now it's Trump, though. So what he's going to do is he's going to say, well, the economy crashed, but it wouldn't have crashed if it hadn't been for the virus. I have nothing to do with the virus. Look what a great job we've done, better than anybody, with the virus, because look how long there were only 15 people in America that had the virus. That's because we're doing such a great job. We couldn't help it if the virus just overwhelmed everything. But the reason there are only 15 people in the United States, 16 now, is because we're not looking. You have to look. You have to test people. We are doing half the number of tests for the virus that they're doing in Singapore.
Well, a related thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is amazing. I hope you're not keeping you up past your bedtime, but this has been fantastic, is the whole issue of vaccines, because I got into that with Chris Northrup and her partner, and I've been suspicious for a long, long time. And where do you stand on the 60-some doses of vaccines for kids?
Okay, well, first of all, where I stand on the 60-some doses is that's nuts. You're reprogramming an immature immune system, and you just can't do that. So to take the approach of every infectious disease that comes out, we should create a vaccine for, is a mistake. Now, part of the reason it's a mistake is there are really several reasons it's a mistake. The first reason is if you vaccinate people for, let's say, measles, which is a pretty bad disease. It's got a row naught, which is the number of people one person will infect, of something like 18. So every one person that gets it will infect 18 other people, because you can be in the same room with somebody and get it. So and people die from it. So it's a bad disease. But if you vaccinate people to it, they do not become permanently immune to it. So then you have to revaccinate them about every 10 years, and we're not doing that. So now you've got a whole bunch of adults who, if they'd gotten the measles the normal way would be immune, who are no longer immune because they got vaccinated, but they're not getting revaccinated. That's a problem, because now when there's a measles outbreak, adults get the measles, and adults don't do so well with the measles, right? Okay, so that's problem number one, is the problem of revaccination. Then the problem is the real issue with the vaccine is not how many, viral particles you put in the vaccine, like measles, mumps, rubella, polio, put 18 things in one. It's not putting that many viral particles in it. It's doing multiple shots where each shot contains the adjuvant that stimulates the immune system. Yeah. So now you stimulate immune system, and then you come back and you stimulate the immune system. And some kids' immune systems cannot handle that. And then you get all of the things that show up in the VAERS, the vaccine, I can't remember what VAERS stands for. It's the government vaccine court that is supposed to adjudicate taking care of the kids who are damaged by vaccines. Adverse effects, reactions. And right, and so so there are people being damaged by vaccines, and they don't need to be. We could create safer vaccines. We could create safer programming for vaccinating kids. Which ones should we vaccinate them to, and how should we give them, and when should we give it to them? But we're not doing any of that because we are so wild to get everybody vaccinated so we have herd immunity, which has never been proven in humans. Yeah. So what do I think about vaccines? Well, I actually went and got a vaccine last month because I have a new grandbaby, and his mother did not want to have anybody touch the baby who had not gotten pertussis vaccine. Okay, well, I haven't had a DPT. I hadn't had a tetanus vaccine in 20 years. I thought, all right, well, I'll get a tetanus vaccine. I'll get the pertussis. I'll make her happy, but I'm not getting the flu shot. So I told her, well, I got the vaccine for pertussis, but I'm not getting a flu shot because I take vitamin D, and that's how I'm going to keep from getting the flu. And I also use mupirocin nose spray to keep my nose from having biofilm that catches the viruses. That's how I really think I stay well. Anyway, so I'm worried that we are creating people who are going to get sick as older people. That's a problem. I am worried that the real problem with vaccines, which is the adjuvants, are not being addressed by the vaccine industry because they don't have to. Because we gave them, we removed from the vaccine industry any culpability for bad vaccines. So they have no reason to create a good vaccine because you can't sue them. They have immunity. And the controls use the adjuvant, so you can't measure what the adjuvant. Well, and then if you look at some of them, like if you look at Gardasil, for instance, there were 4 studies that they used to approve Gardasil, and 3 out of the 4 studies used the adjuvant as the control. Yeah. So they had the same number of deaths. Now, what nobody did was ask, how many deaths should there have been in 16-year-old girls? And if you look at that, it's quite horrifying how many more, like double the deaths happen in the vaccine group, in both groups, in the vaccines and the controls, the ones who got the adjuvant. The one study, which was a much smaller study, that had a control group that didn't have the adjuvant, they saw none of the deaths that they saw in the vaccine group. So that was, reading those studies was when I said, whoa, wait a minute, the problem here is the adjuvant. Yeah. And my friend Tina Kimmel, who was a biostatistician for the state of California, said that when they were there, they intercepted an email from, I've forgotten who it was, that they were, before Gardasil came out, saying basically, hurry up and get it to market so we can take credit for it because the disease is dying out. And then the statistics, all the curves that show that all the major diseases were dying out when the vaccines were introduced. And she had curves, and they didn't change. Yeah, well, a lot of the things we're vaccinating for had dropped way down. There are still outbreaks that people die from. But the question is, what you really want to know as a parent is, what's the chance my kid will be damaged by the adjuvant versus the chance my kid will get the disease and die from it or be damaged from it?
Yeah.
Because most of the kids who get the disease get over it and then they have immunity. So, you've got what you got to compare is apples to apples, and nobody's doing that. There've been a couple of anti-vax organizations trying to compare apples to apples, and it looks pretty good, but probably the studies are not well designed.
Well, the other thing, there's a physician in the Bay Area, Cowell, I've forgotten his first name, just put out a book. He's a pediatrician. He's seeing an enormous difference in the overall health of the unvaccinated kids with the vaccinated kids, and no one's looking at that.
Yeah, but that could also be, those are the kids whose parents are feeding them organic food and getting them out in the sun and go to the right schools, and you're not comparing apples to apples.
Well, it would be nice if somebody did do that.
Wouldn't it be nice? But there's nobody who's going to do it.
No motivation. In fact,
the only person who can afford to do it is the government, and they say everybody should be vaccinated, and the pharmaceutical industry, and they don't have any reason to do it.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's
so what I recommended to my son was vaccinate your children only with the vaccines that you have to use to get him into school, and do it slower. Don't do anything in the first year. Keep him at home, and then, if you have to put him in a nursery school, you're going to have to vaccinate him. So, so drag your heels as much as you can to slow down the number of vaccines, and then always be sure he's on his B vitamins, because my kids have MTHFR polymorphisms. And if you listen to Stephanie Seneff's work, B vitamin metabolism is critical with vaccine side effects. Always make sure he's eating organic for 6 months before you vaccinate him, because glyphosate has an interaction with vaccines.
Yeah, that's everywhere.
And that's in everyone in America has got glyphosate in their urine. Don't vaccinate a kid who's sick. You take him to the pediatrician because he's sick, and they say, "Oh, we'll just give him his vaccines today." And no. You give the vaccine to a healthy kid, not a sick kid.
Yeah.
And then if the kid gets sick, you want to have a recent evaluation of the kid when he was healthy, like before he gets a vaccine, a careful neurological evaluation and physical evaluation. And then when you bring him into the emergency room with his seizures, don't take, well, it can't be the vaccine, because it absolutely can be the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we should be doing, if you have enough money and you're enough worried about this, is you should test him for antibodies before you do the second, third, and fourth vaccines. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do measles 3 times, the kids that have autism have massive antibody response to the vaccine, and they don't need the second dose.
Oh.
So I had a kid who got DPT and had a big reaction to probably the pertussis. And when I went back in for the next vaccine, I said to the pediatrician casually, "Oh, I'm not looking forward to this one." He said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, I was up all night with a screaming child." And he said, "Oh, well, then we're not going to give him this vaccine." Which is probably why I don't have an autistic kid. I have a kid who's got learning disabilities. He's the only one I have that has that, but he doesn't have autism. Mm. Because I had a smart pediatrician and I blurted out, "I'm not looking forward to this vaccine."
Ah. So, yeah, it's a big one. And when's the vote in Maine?
So to answer that question, I am not anti-vaccine. I am very interested in getting the government or the vaccine industry to create a better vaccine, a safer vaccine, or for us to identify the kids who should not be vaccinated.
Yeah.
Either one of those would be fine with me.
When's the vote in Maine occurring on that measure? Is
March
that?
the 2nd. We're a Super Tuesday state.
Oh, okay. That'll be interesting to see. And apparently New Jersey had some success at the blocking bill, the loss of freedom. And Australia is turning into a police state.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
worrisome. Well, we're about to run my battery down here.
Okay, so like, don't publish that I'm anti-vax and that I'm making coronavirus. You know, I think I'm being responsible about it, but I'm worried about some of these things.
Yeah, for sure. What are your final thoughts to leave for coming generations? And
oh gosh, I don't know. I'm sort of just. Right now. I'm getting over the loss of true north. It took a lot of driving in my RV to do that. I did RV therapy. It was pretty good. But anyway, I'm discouraged. But then I'm also discouraged about the larger national implications of dishonesty or the lack of interest in honesty. I mean, people keep saying Trump lies. He lies all the time. He lies continuously. The Washington Post has a, site that tracks how many lies he's done. You got to understand, Trump doesn't lie. Trump bullshits. There is a book you can get online called Bullshit or Bullshitting. And what a bullshitter does is a bullshitter doesn't care about the truth. Mm-hmm. The truth doesn't matter to a bullshitter. A liar, the truth matters and he knows the truth, but he doesn't tell you the truth.
Interesting.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. When we start seeing Trump as a bullshitter, then we will understand why, this is another one of my deep dives into research, why the whole Ukraine thing happened. Because remember Giuliani, who went over to Ukraine, 2 or 3 years before the telephone call with Zelensky, he went over there initially to make money, to monetize his connections. And what had he done of import? He had been the head of the Southern District of New York, taking out Russian mobsters. He knew all the Russian mobsters. He knew where they were. He knew how much money was flying around from Russia, coming to the United States to launder the money. He knew where to go to get a lot of money. And that's what he's done. And that's why the Southern District of New York is after him now. Although Bill Barr is going to keep him from indicting him. And so, he was in Ukraine with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, spreading money around, which we're not sure where the money came from. We think it may have come from Russia. Spreading money around to make contacts for Rudy Giuliani, initially to bollocks up the Mueller report. But when the Mueller report, they managed to get it to fizzle out, then they found they had already bumped into the Bidens and Burisma story, and then Biden looked like he might be the candidate, so they went after the Biden-Burisma story. And of course, there are prosecutors over there who are corrupt, and one of them gave him a whole lot of bullshit that he's been spreading around over there to try to get his job back. And so then the worst possible thing happened after all of their work to get their connections. Zelensky got elected, and suddenly none of their connections were any good anymore. So then Rudy tries to get in to see Zelensky, and he won't see him because Zelensky got elected on an anti-corruption platform. And he knows really Rudy Giuliani's talking to all the corrupt people in town. So he won't see Giuliani. And then Giuliani sends him the letter that says, I am the president's lawyer and you should talk to me. And he still won't see Giuliani. And Giuliani calls Trump and says, I can't get the guy to see me. And then the July 25th telephone call happened, which was about getting Zelensky to take a meeting with Giuliani. That's what that telephone call was for.
Oh.
Now, what was he doing to try to get him to take the telephone call? He was threatening him, but they had done that before. He had done it before with the previous president, Poroshenko. He had done the same thing before with the missiles. They're not Stinger missiles. I can't remember the name of the missiles. You know, that Trump says, oh, we gave him the missiles and Obama wouldn't give him the missiles. Yeah, he gave him the missiles after he agreed to give him dirt on the Manafort, the black ledger for Manafort. That was what he was getting, trying to get dirt on back then with the previous administration. And so he wouldn't give it to him until they got the guy who outed the black ledger, indicted, and got the then he gave him the missiles. But there's a trick with the missiles. He got the missiles, but he has to keep them on the opposite side of the country from the Russians. So he got the missiles, but he can't use the missiles. Okay, so there's some interesting stuff going on there too.
Well, you're a full-time researcher, it sounds like.
Oh man, I just sit all day long. It's I should go and exercise. Yeah, no, I read the Mueller report. I watched the impeachment, hearings. I watched the trial. I watched the Senate. I read the letter. I read the whistleblower report. I read the transcript from the 25th phone call, the July 25th. I've read it all. It's what's interesting. What the take-home message from all of that is: everyone around Donald Trump is a criminal.
Yeah.
The guy has been dealing with Russian criminals for years.
And people don't seem to care.
They don't care.
I was up at Brisbane yesterday with a group protesting outside the British consulate of the extradition of Julian Assange, who is a local from here, and his father. We have a local group that his father has spoken to, and some local journalists who have been following him. And to me, and I think today was his first appearance in court, is that could be a landmark or a watershed decision if he goes down for whistleblowers, and another step in the police state. But there's no press. We had no press coverage at all yesterday.
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, why do we have to make that case the whistleblower case? I mean, there are things we need to know from Julian Assange, and we're not going to know those until he testifies someplace where he can get in trouble for lying.
Say more.
So, he's the guy that collaborated with the Russians on the timing of the releases for the DNC that got Bernie Siegel's people all up in arms right before the convention, which they managed to get them quieted down. But they're doing the same thing this time. They're going to get Bernie Siegel's people all fired up and telling them that, it's not fair and they should have they should get the nomination with 30% of the Democratic vote. And like, if Bernie Siegel gets the nomination, we're screwed. We're going to have 4 more years of Donald Trump, and we're going to have a Republican Senate and probably Congress. That's what Bernie Siegel's going to do to us.
I think you mean Bernie Sanders.
No, that's what I mean, Bernie Sanders.
I've been getting them confused too.
Yeah, no, Bernie Sanders. Yeah, Bernie Sanders. So I don't know what's going to happen over here, but it ain't going to be good. But I think Julian Assange collaborated with the Russians, and I want him to say so.
And Trump has offered him a pardon if he.
Yeah, Trump's going to give him he's going to give him a pardon if he doesn't say that. If he continues to say that, oh no, the Russians didn't give me this stuff. Because then Trump can keep his mythology about he didn't collaborate with the Russians.
Yeah.
But he did collaborate with the Russians. He just he just is a smart enough mobster to know that you never say the words.
Yeah.
You never say what you want done. You just let people know what you want by, by taking them out if they don't do what you want. And so then when it can never come back to you. The head of the mob never gets taken down, because no, I never said that. I didn't kill anybody. I've never killed anybody.
Yeah.
I've never stolen any money. That's our president.
Wow. Can we think of a positive note to end this on?
Oh God, well, we should delete all of that last part, because in this country, I mean, we're getting pretty close to, they're going to come out and take you to the hoosgow by saying things on the internet. Oh my God, oh my God. So I've said a lot of fairly controversial things.
I think I'm going to make that a separate segment and not put
Yeah,
it in.
no, well, no, be careful with, don't get me into trouble, okay? Just don't get me into trouble, Jack. Like, I don't mind talking about coronavirus, because I don't think in none of these things am I saying things that are not out there that you can find if you've got a connection to the internet, okay? So, and I think I'm fairly careful about researching things that look like conspiracy theories. So warning, if it looks like a conspiracy theory, it's probably a conspiracy theory, and be very careful passing those things on. Like the Wuhan virus came from a virology lab in Wuhan and the animals got taken to the market. That sounds, they take a kernel of truth and they they weaponize it. So if it looks like it's been weaponized, I would take it with a grain of salt. As far as holistic healthcare, it may be a good thing that the pseudopodic ego has gathered it up and consumed it, because there are good things going on in healthcare. I've had, my brother, my sister, my sister-in-law, my good friend, who've all encountered the healthcare system and surprised me with a healthcare system that treated them well. And so there are good people in the conventional healthcare system who are doing integrative healthcare, who are doing family-centered healthcare, who are doing loving, caring healthcare, and that fills me with positive things, feelings. And then there are also things that make me crazy, like my brother is having trouble with his medication and we can't get a hold of anybody on call. And I finally took the telephone from his wife and I said to the secretary, I said, are you telling me that you have a practice with at least 2 physicians and nobody is on call for an emergency for a patient who's having trouble with the drugs? Are you telling me that? Because if you are, I said, that's malpractice. And she says, just a moment. There's a long pause. She comes back on the line. There's obviously somebody standing over her shoulder. And she says, we're going to text the nurse practitioner and she's going to call you back. I said, good, you should have her call this telephone number, which is his wife's phone number. Did she ever call back? No, she didn't call back. So 2 hours later, it's now 7 o'clock, on Friday. And I said to his wife, I said, call again, because now the night shift is on and somebody should take that phone call. So they did, and his doctor called him back from another state, and they worked out the medication problem, which was good. So
your intervention, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Well, no, it would have happened because I would have said, let's wait until after they go off duty and we'll call the answering service and see who we can get. But, so that was discouraging. I've had that, 2 or 3 times. My mother has trouble getting in touch with her doctor, and she's 97. And my sister does okay because she advocates for herself and has some top people taking care of her. And, her husband has connections, so they're always very careful with her. And I'm just glad I'm healthy.
And no,
So you want to know why I'm healthy? Because I've eaten organic for a long time, so I don't have as much glyphosate in me as most people. Okay. I have gizmos that I use. Like I have an ARP wave machine in case my knees start hurting. I figured if I could keep my knees, I'd live a long time. So I have an ARP wave machine. I have a red light. So I put the red light on anything that's bothering me, and it's amazing what red light does. And I have a My Health machine, which is a little woo-woo, but I've had positive effects from it. So, if it works for me, then I have to admit it may work.
what is a My Health?
My Health is an electromagnetic transmitter. It transmits different frequencies, different electromagnetic frequencies, and it's got a million settings, and I don't really know how to do all the settings, but I use it if I'm getting a cold. It will back down a virus a lot of times.
How do you use it? A mat or a
just turn it on and put it on your pillow and go to sleep. There is a way to actually rub it on your skin and find the places that, if you've got if your neck is in spasm, I'll use the rub it on your skin version. But it's an interesting, it's My Health, MIHEALTA, My Health, look it up. And, but the ARP wave is magic. I
don't know about that either. What is that?
It's electrical stimulation. You put pads on. There's a protocol for finding out. The theory is there are no joint problems. There are only muscle problems. And so what happens is you injure yourself and tear a muscle or a ligament, and then you protect it. And so when you're protecting it, your brain forgets it's there because you're not using it. So then the other muscles around that joint hypertrophy, and it pulls the joint out of alignment. So now you've got a joint that's grinding on itself, and pretty soon there's no joint, and you have to have it replaced. If you can get it back into alignment by finding the muscle that's missing and exercising that, and then exercising the whole joint when all the muscles are now reconnected to your brain, you can A, get rid of the pain, and B, fix the joint. And I've seen it do some pretty magic things. It's done some pretty magic things for me.
And it's called what? The ARP machine?
It's called ARP, Advanced Recovery Protocol. ARP wave, ARP wave.
I should know all these things. I'm trying to remember.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a good one. And then
the red
light. The red light is, there's a guy who's selling them out of Canada. And his name is, I can't remember his name, but his website is called www.endalldisease.com, which drives me crazy. But yeah, he's going to end all disease with a red light, right? But my neurology friend, Catherine Wilner, who's got a bigger brain than I do, put me onto red light for my brother's Parkinson's. So, I said, what else can you use this thing for? She said, well, I read the book, and there were a whole bunch of things, and there's studies in the research on 2 wavelengths of red light. So I have the red light here. I put it behind me and turn it on. I'm gonna, I decided I was losing too much hair and I needed to red light my scalp.
Because Lynn Saputo, who I interviewed a few months ago, is using a very high intensity, it's 24 different frequencies, and he's seeing some remarkable results with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but it penetrates 10 inches, so it goes
these 2 wavelengths penetrate tissue. It's supposed to stimulate mitochondria.
Yeah, that seems to be the common pathway, but
apparently it's 2 wavelengths of red light that work with it. And there are studies, and so I read the studies, and they're okay, but not great. And then I read his book, and it's a little kitschy, but it's it gives you the basic idea of what you're doing with it. And then I talked to Catherine Wilner, and she says, oh yeah, it works. I'm like, okay, let me get one of those and see if I can get my brother to put the red light on his head. And so then I, treated my son's IT band when he ran the marathon, and that was pretty good. He was walking the next day. And just last week, I got a scotoma. I thought I was going to get a migraine, and I put the red light on, and I mean, it stopped just like that.
Wow.
Whoa, that's interesting. Of course, I'm a re-skeptic. That's a receptive skeptic. So my first thought is, nah, that didn't happen. It has to happen multiple times for me to buy it. So I'll be waiting for the next scotoma to see if I can red light it away again.
Yeah. So you've had migraines in the past. And
I get the scotoma, and then my head feels too big, but I don't get a terrible headache. And I don't get them very often. I get them maybe, once a year, maybe, Oh, you're gone again.
I got the low battery message here.
Uh-oh.
So I think we can.
You're cutting out. I guess so. I guess we're going to have to say goodbye.
Yeah, I got a low battery message. I've never had that happen before. You've set a record for
okay.
And interest.
I can talk. I inherited that from my mother.
This has been fantastic, Bethany. Thank you so much. And,
all right. Be so careful when you edit this. Please don't be in trouble.
Okay. Take care, my friend.
Actually, I don't really care because I'm going to, what can they do to me? Take my license? I'm retired. So what?
Yes. All right. Well, my best.
All right. Good to see you, Jack.
We not get the COVID-19.
Yeah. Okay. Just, wash your hands 3 times a day, take your shoes off at the door. And if you go out, put gloves on so you won't touch your face. That's, that's all you need to do for now.
Interesting. Gloves when you go out.
Well, nitrile gloves will remind you not to touch surfaces that may be contaminated with virus, and then touch your face, which is how you get the virus.
That's clever. That's simple. Yeah.
So it's one of the, there's just a few things that make sense to start doing now, so that when the virus hits Australia, it's already in Australia, but when it hits big time, you will have the habits in place that will keep you from getting sick.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to get sick. I hope to be among the people who don't get sick.
Yeah, me too. Well,
so if we can stay well until the virus morphs into something less dangerous, then, we won't get sick.
Okay. Well, thank you again.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.